So my friends, we are starting today in what we're calling our Old Testament foundational story series, or something like that. Basically, we're going to spend some time in the Old Testament going through some of the foundational stories that get referred to as we move throughout the New Testament. And so today we're beginning with the story of Noah. And I think God's humor is funny. It's kind of raining today. But if you need an ark, I know a guy. So anyways, I was torn between wearing my Noah tie or my Noah t-shirt. So I wore the t-shirt. Maybe for the second service, I'll put on the tie. In any case, we're going to be in chapters 6, 8, and 9 of Genesis. And we'll actually refer to 5, 4, and all kinds of others. And there's actually way too much text for us to get through today. And so when we sent the information out, I was really hoping that you would read the whole Noah story, which begins in chapter 6, going through chapter 9, so that you'd be somewhat familiar. And so when we hear this story, what I want you to really do is to no longer think of the cute Noah images that you've learned in Sunday school. And really think about what is the bigger story that is being told here about God and God's relationship with humanity and creation. And what does that mean for us today? So we begin in chapter 6, and I added some other verses that may not be up there, so just you'll just have to work through that. When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. And then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown." So that is a great big statement, almost a mythological statement that some of its exactness we can never really know, but it's referring to in some way these fallen angels, these angels, or what people saw back then as giants that were on the earth, people that were in the council, the courts of God who came to the earth. They crossed this boundary between heaven and earth. In the religion and theologies of other peoples in ancient times, that was very much allowed, very much seen as happening. But for God, there is a boundary between heaven and earth that cannot be crossed. In verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of their thoughts, of the thoughts of their hearts, was only evil continually. So we notice here that God is knowing the hearts of those people that were on the earth, and he's seeing that there is just this evilness that is pervasive in all of creation. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. We don't generally cover that in Sunday school. The Lord was sorry. God was sorry so much it grieved him to his heart. This is a very, very key verse. We, in this story, are learning about the heart of God, how God is in relationship to us. So the Lord said, "I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created." Oh, great. That's nice to know, God. Thank you. "For all the people together with animals and creeping things and the birds of the air, for I'm sorry that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord, and these are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. So what we see here is a sort of hero of the story, the one in whom walked with God. Now, Noah was not sinless, but Noah is going to represent the goodness of God's creation that is still there. Now, the earth was corrupt in God's sight. I'm in verse 11 of chapter 6. "And the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth." So all flesh, humankind, had corrupted the flesh, the creation. The original intent of God's creation on this earth is no longer in play, is basically what is being said. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. For my part, for God's part, I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. That's pretty complete. But God says to Noah, I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. So that will be 8 people. Noah and his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So we see this obedience and faith that Noah has. So we go to chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and all the domestic animals that were with him in the ark. So I skipped totally chapter 7, which is the floodwaters came. The rains came down from heavens. The geysers from deep in the earth filled up. Everything filled the water, the earth for over 150 days. It rained solid 40 days, 40 nights. Everything is underwater. Noah, all these animals are on an ark floating around the world that is covered in water. But God remembered Noah. This always strikes me. But God remembered Noah. God, what were you doing that you had to remember? Oh, hey, there's that ark. I should probably do something. So God made the wind blow over the earth and the waters subsided. Now, when you hear this, hopefully there is something inside of you saying, you know what, this almost sounds like another creation story, a recreation, a starting over. Because in Genesis, it talks about how the waters covered the void. And the waters were there, and then the Spirit of God, the Ruach, blew upon the waters. So here again, God says, he made a wind, the Spirit to blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. This flood lasts for over a year. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he made and sent out the raven. All right, so the raven goes out, and then, because of time, I'm going to speed this up. And then 3 doves go out. Finally, the dove comes back with an olive branch. He's like, hey, it's dry, we can go out. All right, verse 15. Then God said, Noah, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out of every living thing that is with you of all the flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply. Just like when God made the animals, it was good, be fruitful and multiply. Verse 20 of chapter 8, Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. You may be asking yourself, well, how did he do this? Because he only brought 2, and if he used them, won't they be gone? Key observation. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. Okay, so you flooded everything, everything's wiped out, but yet you look at the 8 people that are there, and you know what? God says to himself, they're still evil. They're still who they are. So what's going to change? God, seeing us, recognizes, nor will I ever again destroy. So the curse upon the grounds from Adam and God's desire to bring wrath upon us, God's like, okay, that's who they are, who I've made. God will change. As long as the earth endures, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. As long as the earth continues in its cycle, year in and year out of living and creating and growing, I pledge I will not do this. Chapter 9. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But the fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air and on everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. In other words, there's still like this, fear that happened after, Eve and the serpent and all the other animals, after the Garden of Eden's vision had changed. That's still now in place. That's in place. And into your hands, they are delivered. You have dominion, but not domination. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Just as I gave you green plants, I give you everything. Verse 5, and this isn't up there, but for your own lifeblood, I will surely require a reckoning for every animal. I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. God says that human life, all life is of value. And there is a reckoning, an answering that will happen when you take the life of another. And then in verse 6 it says, for in his own image God made humankind. Just like back in Genesis 1, 26, 27, when God says that humankind was made in the image of God, we are reminded that every life has value because you have been made in the image of God. Noah, in essence, becomes the new father of everyone as Adam had once been. Then God said this to Noah and to his sons with him, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, and as many as came out of the ark. I will establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So this covenant is called the Noahide covenant, made with Noah, but it's unique in the Bible, the only covenant that's like it, because it's not only made with humans, with humankind, but it's made with all creation. But it's one-sided. God said, hey, I'm doing this. I pledge, I am in covenant with you that I will never destroy by flood the earth again. This is a sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant. And maybe God will remember where page 3 went. There it is. I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. A lot of repetition there. This is the covenant that God has put into place. So this is not a children's story about Noah. And in the email for the bulletin I put out, I said, well, if you have a chance, watch the Russell Crowe version of the Noah story called Noah. Now, it's not really all accurate. There's a lot of Hollywood in there. But there's some things about that movie that I like. It kind of deals with the big rock creatures. Those are the fallen angels. But I like in a way in the sense where Noah, you can see him in relationship with the Creator, with God. But there's Noah's story. The Reverend Dr. Wright wrote, when my older daughter was almost 4, she was given a lovely set of 3 Bible stories, the creation, Jonah, and Noah's Ark. And after we read the flood story, she asked, Mommy, did God kill all the babies because they cried too much? She had a baby sister who cried a great deal. How does one answer that question to be understood on the level of a 4-year-old? There's some things we sort of gloss over. Hey, everybody, the flood's coming. Come get into the ark. Great. And we put it on the children's walls and all this and that. And the reality is a bunch of people died. What happened? What was going on? And so here's where some of our theology starts to become starts to be formed when we're younger that we carry over into our teenage years and we carry into adults and we're not even really aware of it. First, we realize, okay, animals are cute, all the animals. But second, we start to learn, well, God was killing the wicked people, those other people. I would obviously be in the boat, right? So we create this strong theological tradition that the wicked deserve to be punished, those wicked people out there. Then there's also sort of this cautionary tale of like, well, is God gonna kill me? Would God kill me if I'm bad? Right? Like we start thinking these different things. Like there's all kinds of questions that begin to be raised. Well, let's take a look at some of the key things here and some other questions. Now, just as a matter of curiosity here, who's the oldest person in the Bible? Methuselah, 965 years, right? That's Noah's grandfather. Lamech, Noah's father, only lived to be 777. Noah lived to be about 950 years. If you follow the chronology in the Bible, Adam and Eve, Adam would be alive during Noah's father's time frame when Noah was born, and Noah would still be alive when Abraham is born. But remember, God has seen that humans are living too long and is then bringing down the lifespan of humans from 500, 700, 900 years to right about 120 is the extent to which humankind will live. So we look at some questions here. Why are only birds and animals mentioned about perishing in the flood? What about all the whales and fishies? Maybe it's hard to drown them in the water. I don't know, right? But we can think of that. Like, I guess they still lived. They were okay. Although Noah is said to be both righteous and the best of his generation, did he warn anybody about the impending flood? Who was helping him build the ark? What did his neighbors say? like, hey, Noah, why are you building the ark? What's going to happen? Can we hitch a ride? Is there room for us? I mean, we start reading into here some details, like if Noah's like, hey, yeah, can you help me build this? Great, yeah, but you can't get in it. That seems really kind of cruel, doesn't it? What's going on here? Well, lots of questions about the story, but again, it's not a story that's meant to answer a bunch of detailed questions. It's a story that's meant to convey to you, what does God do when God looks down into the world and into creation and sees chaos and sees sin and sees how we are acting on a daily basis? It's a story of God who loves us and comes in a way to changes how he will forever interact with humankind. Now, I suppose we could consider ourselves lucky, fortunate, I don't know. We weren't around in the time of Noah, so we didn't die in the flood. And we get to be in relation with this God who is loving us patiently, unconditionally. Now, there are other flood stories similar to Noah in other ancient cultures. The story of Noah is put together from 2, even 3 different sources, which is why you have, sometimes Noah brings in 2 pairs, sometimes there are 7 pairs, and then how does Noah offer sacrifices if there's only 2, right? So you have a priestly source and a Yahwistic source of ancient writings that were put together to tell the story of Noah. We are not to be stuck on details. We are looking at it as a people of faith and as a story of faith. What is this saying to us about our common pilgrimage, our common journey in life, and how does this apply to me today? We've already seen one thing where, again, we already consider ourselves to be like Noah. We're the good people that would obviously be invited into the ark. If God were to look down on the world and say, okay, it's not going to be a flood, but it's going to be something else, we would be the ones who would be saved. And so it made me think about, well, what was so wicked about all the people? It doesn't say how they were wicked or how they were evil. It was just what was going on in their thoughts. How does God transform the world? How does God decisively change the situation of all creatures? And so we look at this again. The world betrays God's intent. So Walter Brueggemann, famous theologian, pastor, he's talking about when we look at this, we see where creation has altered God's intent for what we were supposed to be doing. The earth was filled with violence. It's repeated in the Bible that the earth was corrupt as all flesh had corrupted its ways. And God said, I have determined to make an end of all flesh. You see, sometimes we see God as unchanging, right? That God knows everything. But we see in the story here where God regretted, God looked. But this isn't a story of a tyrant. This is a story of a God who grieved in his heart. A God that's empathetic. A God who makes a decision that he knows is costly to God, not only in terms of the life of creation, but it's going to be costly to God because God is going to say, from here on out, despite who you are, I will patiently and consistently and faithfully be with you, love you, invite you to be in relationship with me. Would God destroy us? Because again, I keep thinking, well, what were the wicked and evil things that were happening? Is someone so wicked all the time, every minute of the day? I just don't think so. There was life, there was things that were happening. But we know that our infidelity, our lack of faithfulness diminishes our lives and the lives of those around us. The world disintegrates, our life disintegrates when we make life-draining decisions which separates us from the will of God. The God of Israel, what is being told about in this Old Testament story, is a God who does change God's mind, a God who is learning to be in freedom to do what God wants with creation, yet decisively changes and determines and says, I will restrain myself, even when you do not. God's creative power continues. This is not a story about the world assaulted and a God who stands remote. This is a story about a God who says, I will bring relief. Which leads us to the name of Noah. If we look at Noah in chapter 5, towards the end, Lamech, his father, in Genesis 5:29, says that when Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son. He named him Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. Now, the translation there doesn't quite do it justice in terms of what it means, but Noah is the one who will bring relief to humankind from the sorry state of humankind that is now far apart from the vision of God. So the God of all comfort, as it says in 2 Corinthians 13, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all consolation, who consoles us in all of our afflictions, so that we may be able to console those who are in any affliction with the consolation with which we ourselves are consoled by God, comforted by God. Noah holds the promise of a new beginning. When it says that Noah and God walked together, that God walked with Noah, what does that mean? What does that mean? What do you see happening there when you're walking, that God is walking, that Noah is walking with God? You see, I think that's a daily relationship. So we want to again see, well, the world was so wicked, they must have been horrible people. Maybe, maybe not. What's more horrible is maybe the way in which we ignore God, turn our back to God, turn our face away from God, ignore the commands of God, ignore our relationship with God, meaning we live as if we haven't proclaimed Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. We create the opportunities by which we want to give mercy or grace or forgiveness. We lack the discipline to walk daily with God. I don't know that there has to be specific acts of wickedness that we do. I think we all do them to varying degrees. But this Noah walks with God. There was a daily relationship. So in chapter 7, it talks about the flood. And then God remembered. You see, when God remembers, remembering changes the situation in the point of the story. It changes it from hostility or what God was doing upon the earth to a commitment. God remembered the people. Remembering is an act of gracious engagement and committed passion. God's remembering gives hope and makes new life. God remembers. We created in the image of God are told to remember. We read in the Psalms and in stories of the New Testament to remember God. Psalm 105 talks about remember the mercies of God. Remember the works of God. Mary in her Magnificat in Luke chapter 1 talks about remember the wonderful mercies of God coming upon us, and now we have Jesus Christ. But knowing that God remembers, and think about this, it means that you're not forgotten, that you are eternally remembered, that you are remembered by the divine. God in Psalm 139 says, I knew you. I knew you before you were formed. The resolution of the story comes by the resolve of God's heart to fashion a newness for life moving forward. So we see that when Moses and his sons and the family come out of the boat, they offer these altars, and God looks at their heart and is like, they are still the same. They are still the same, but I will love them. So hope moving forward depends on God, that God will do something. The flood has not changed creation, but God will now approach creation with unlimited patience and forbearance. What does that mean in your life? That means that as you go through life and as you struggle with different things and times where we struggle to be the person that our pets think we are, when we struggle to be the person that our spouse hopes we are, whatever it is. This God looks at our hearts and knows us and loves us and continues with this invitation of grace. But God's commitment to this is marked by grief. It grieved God's heart. It's marked by grief, hurt, and betrayal of all creation by us. God's commitment is costly. God's commitment brings us to the cross. God's commitment brings us to Jesus Christ, God incarnate, Emmanuel, once again coming to us and saying, listen, love, there is a new way. There is another way. It's costly. So we come to this image again that we are created in chapter 9, verse 6. We are created in the image of God. This still is maintained, who we are. This vocation entrusted to us to be stewards of the earth and of all of creation. Because before, humankind had corrupted all of the earth and all of creation. But what's not promised in here is our ability to kill ourselves, to kill the earth, to utilize and take advantage of. And so the rainbow, the bow and arrow, the bow was the most sophisticated weapon of its time back then. And that was used as the bow pointing upward to God as a sign. God is in essence saying, I am unilaterally disarming myself against my creation. I will not flood or destroy because of your acts, but that I will love you. And it's a covenant that's one-sided. We don't have to do anything. And God has continued to be faithful in that covenant towards us. God promises never again to use this flood to return the earth to chaos. To chaos. Chaos is what was there before the earth was formed, when the waters covered this void and God's Spirit moved and formed. Chaos was there when the floods came and turned everything. See, God, whether there was a flood or not, what we're seeing here is that at that point in time in the cycle, the lifespan of humanity, there was a chaos involved because of people's lack of awareness of the one and true living God, living as they wanted to, how they wanted to, when they wanted to, using resources as they wanted to at the expense of another person. There was a dehumanization of people. This comes into our life now because it impacts every time the way you think of people, of ethnicities, of races, of cultures, of whatever it is you come across. No one was spared, not one nation over another. It was God said, your hearts and who you are, I need to make a change. There was this chaos. I also see in this, and we talked about this before, that as one who stands, you can be one who stands in the midst of chaos, knowing that there is a God who will be there. When the waters are rising, waters may cut through what you see as opportunities and what you see as having planned and what you wanted to and where you thought your life or your family or your job or your health or whatever may be going, but God is still there saying, I will be there and in love and in patience rescue you, be with you. How will that look? I don't know. But it means that day in and day out, there's a God that is there. There's a God who is listening, compassionate, a God who is not distant, but a God who is there saying, I see. We often, again, as we talked about, that God is unchanging, but I would say that God is unchanging in his changing. God has unchanging love, but he changes his approach to reach you versus you versus you. God is unchanging in his compassion, but God changes how God reveals himself to us. God is unchanging in his grace, but he's changing in how the message or the channel of grace is delivered. That should sound familiar to us from our story of Ruth. In the midst of chaos, God does not forget. God does not forget us. Christ has come. And so when we look at the story of Noah, see it now as a God who loves you, God who decides unilaterally on God's self to be in relationship, covenant with you, that in the midst of your chaos, in the midst of your life, that God will be there. Why is that important? I had a conversation with someone who said, well, I'm not sure my kids will go to heaven because of what they do. Well, I know a God who's in covenant with us. I know a God who doesn't forget them. I know a God that's going to love them. I know a God who knows their heart, and even though we may perceive that there is wickedness out there, there is a God. Now, you may not like that because it goes against our sense of justice or what people deserve. But that's something you'll have to work out with God one of these days. Because this God is going to love you, and this God is going to rain down his grace upon each one of you. Amen.